You have probably never heard of Kiribati, but the tiny Pacific island nation, about 3,000 kilometers southwest of Hawaii, is home to about 100,000 people, all of whom are facing a future where their island is swallowed up by rising sea levels. Their story is told in the documentary Anote's, which has its Canadian premiere tomorrow at the 2018 Hot Docs Film Festival here in Toronto. One of the key figures in that film is Anote Tong. He was president of Kiribati for more than a decade, and he's become a leading voice, raising awareness about the human costs of climate change. And former President Anote Tong joins us now for more. It's so good to meet you.
Very nice to be here, thank you.
We have established the fact that, unlike in the United States where you're Mr. President forever, I don't call you that, right? I just call you Mr. Tong.
Well, we even less than that. You can call me by my first name.
No, I'm not going to do that. I don't call former presidents by their first names.
We're fairly informal where we are.
Okay. I think it's a good idea to start by showing a clip of the documentary to explain why you have traveled 9,000 kilometers to be with us here in this studio and talk about something that is awfully near and dear to your heart. So let's take a look at an excerpt from Anote's Ark. Sheldon, go.
Kiribati is in the center of the world. And so it's right there, bang in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So far away, so isolated. We thought it would be immune from the tribulations of this world. The issue of climate change remains the most pressing challenge for us in Kiribati.
Rising sea levels have already taken a village on one of your islands. Do you see the possibility of all the people from Kiribati one day having to leave?
For those of us on the front line, it really does not matter what is agreed to in Paris, because we will continue to go underwater.
You have traveled all over the world to wave the flag for your homeland because you tell us you think it is on the verge of extinction. Why?
Well, the science is pretty categorical. I mean, our islands on average are about 2 meters above sea level, and the projection of sea level rise within the century is a meter or even over a meter. So the margin, the margin between the rise in sea level, but do not forget that this is not a lake. It's an ocean where there is a lot of dynamic.
We actually have a chart that reflects what you're trying to say here. Mm-hmm. That line is going inexorably in one direction.
Absolutely, and so what we might have thought was part of the normal cycle is no longer that, because science is telling us that there is sea level rise, and so it's not going to get the water, once it comes, it's not going to recede. It's going to keep coming and keep coming, but at that accelerated level.
Sheldon, let's bring up chart 2 as well, because the fact is, Kiribati today, that's what you anticipate it looking like in, I guess, a few years. But towards the end of this century, scientists are forecasting an island nation that is 80% underwater.
Well, you're talking about you're talking about the rise of water in something like a lake. And we must understand that we do have a lot of wave action. And there's going to be increased energy in the water and the sea. What we are experiencing at the moment, beginning to experience, is actually the change in the weather pattern. And I believe that is going to be coming as the major threat ahead of the rise in sea level. We did experience for the first time a cyclone in 2015 because on the equator we create the storms, but they go north or south. But Cyclone Pam, which hit the islands of Vanuatu and destroyed it, came around back and went back north, flooded all of the islands of Tuvalu, who are just a little south of us, and hit our 2 southernmost islands in a manner that we've never experienced.
And then the Fiji one, the worst one ever recorded.
Our Fiji with Winston in 2016, and of course this year they've been having a series of storms as well. So things are happening which clearly indicate that something is terribly wrong. And I think we mustn't only focus in the Pacific. It's happening everywhere else. And so there is a very clear indication that something is terribly wrong with the weather.
Let's bring a map up here because, as I suggested off the top, Canada is a long way away from where your homeland is. Mm-hmm. There's Australia, and here's you. Here's Kiribati, a few islands in the middle of the Pacific, halfway between Hawaii and Australia. And that's just, what are there, 33 islands or atolls that make up the country?
They're all atolls. And so as atolls, they're just coral structures on the top of seamounts. And so they're very, very narrow and therefore and very low-lying and therefore extremely vulnerable.
What's the economy in Kiribati?
We have a huge fishery resource. We still have that. And so that being the main source of revenue for the country.
What's the chance that we here in the province of Ontario have ever eaten fish from Kiribati?
I think every possibility, because we have in our part of the world, in the Western and Central Pacific, of which Kiribati is a part, we have 60% of the remaining tuna resource in the world. And so I have no doubt that the tuna you've been eating most probably came from our part of the world.
Again, we suggested off the top that you have traveled all over the world to get the word out. Mm-hmm. How much success do you think you've had so far in getting the world to be aware of the plight of your country?
Well, it was extremely disappointing at the start. I started this pretty soon after I came into office after 2003. And because I was listening to the science was not giving us a good message, given those scenarios. You know, I think without any significant adaptation, we can be assured that our islands will no longer be habitable within the decades ahead of us.
You have met a couple of Canadian Prime Ministers, Stephen Harper.
Yes, I have.
His birthday is today, incidentally, and Justin Trudeau as well, of course. How committed did you think either one of them was when you had a chance to meet them and talk to them about this?
Well, I met Stephen Harper in 2009 before the Copenhagen meeting. We were in a closed session. The Canadian policy at the time was very different on climate change, not so acknowledging of the danger posed by climate change. And of course, with your current Prime Minister, I met him in 2015 in Malta, just before the 2015 Paris discussions. And of course, I thought he was a breath of fresh air coming in and totally changing the policy, Canada's policy on climate change, which of course he continues to advocate. And so this is my first visit to Canada, and I think Canada has done something that many other countries need to do, and that is to really look more closely at what's happening on climate change and acknowledge the impact and the danger it poses for communities.
Well, that takes us to the United States, and I wonder how depressed you were when President Trump decided to take the United States, or indicate his support for taking the U.S. out of the Paris Accord.
Well, I was extremely disappointed. I mean, with Obama, with whom I had a number of meetings, he was very supportive and managed to bring in the United States in 2015. The announcement by the new administration was a great disappointment. But let me say that following that announcement, the commitment by the leadership in industry and at the state level has been overwhelming. And I think to a very large extent, that's really diluted the impact of what might otherwise have been a very significant impact as a result of the United States withdrawing.
Having said that, you wish the U.S. was on side, I assume.
Absolutely. I think I did. I visited a lot of capitals in the lead up to Paris, trying to build up momentum for an agreement to be reached. And a lot of the leaders, including the European Union, they were saying that no, we cannot do much, not without the United States on board. And but my position was this: if you think it's right, go ahead and do it, regardless of who's there and who's not. And so I think that the suggestion that we needed the United States was based on the negative positions taken by China and India at the time. Now, what is amazing is the significant realignment of the positions of China and India, which to a large extent has plugged in the gap and I think, retain some credibility to the future of the Paris Agreement.
Mr. Tong, the world knows, right? The world now knows. You've been on the agenda at the United Nations, so all of the countries of the world know. What do you want them to do at this point?
I think Paris was a wonderful achievement in diplomacy, but here we have a paper agreement. What we need is solutions, concrete solutions on the ground that would actually deal with the problem. To date, we've not seen that, and so for us, I've always made the point that even with 2 degrees rise in global temperature, 1.5, even 0, is for us disastrous, because the momentum of the emissions already in the atmosphere will continue to ensure that the sea level will continue to rise.
Does that suggest it is inevitable that your people are going to have to leave their homeland?
It's inevitable that our islands will not be habitable in the decades ahead. I think the challenge and the question is, can we build resilience sufficiently to remain above the rising seas and the intensifying storms? And that is the question, which up to now does not have an answer.
You know, there is a moment in the documentary where there's some fairly interesting ideas, expensive ideas too, to bring technology, innovation, new discoveries to bear to allow people to stay there. What do you think the chances are of that working?
Well, I think, as I said in the film, what is fiction today could well be the reality of the future. And so in exploring those options, it was out of desperation, because there didn't appear to be any other credible options. And so if that is the option, then obviously we must consider it, because the alternative is not acceptable. The possibility of leaving our homeland.
That's one of the solutions that have been talked about, right?
That is an option. It's science fiction, but so are many things that are happening today.
Do you think that's possible to actually do?
Oh, I hope it is possible, because what is the alternative? It means that we would have to leave our homeland. And I mean, it's been very difficult to accept that. But at the same time, we must acknowledge the brutal reality of the challenge facing us.
Well, they say all politics is local. And let's talk local politics from your homeland, because your successor as president has said, we don't believe that Kiribati will sink. Our country, our beautiful lands, are created by the hands of God. It sounds as if he's saying, if you pray hard enough, this will all work out in the end. What do you think?
Well, I think from my own experience, I had this opposition from church leaders when I was talking about this at home. And of course, being very much a Christian society, we tend to misinterpret what God's job is and what our job is as leaders of our people. And I'd love to believe that we can leave it all in the hands of God, but I would not risk that, because for me personally, I have a lot of grandchildren, and I have not seen God come down yet. But I think God comes in the form of people like who will provide leadership to find solutions. So God is not going to come down from the heavens or wherever it is. So, and the reason, this is really one of the reasons that I went to see the Pope.
We've got some video of that. Let's bring that up if we can right now.
When slavery was the norm in the 18th century, it was not regarded as being immoral. Likewise, apartheid was accepted by the international community for a long time. So climate change, in my view, was exactly the same thing. Why did we not think about it before? Why did we not do anything about it?
Yeah, when was your meeting with the Pope?
In 2015, at beginning of 2015, trying to get him to come on board on this debate.
And did he?
He did, very much so. And I can see that we had a long time to talk about this. And, but I needed that moral guidance for the global community, because I've always indicated that climate change is the greatest moral challenge facing humanity. It's not about what matters to you, it's what about matters to others that for which you can make a contribution to addressing.
The Pope no doubt said he would pray for you and your future.
Oh, I prayed for him too, but I think not only did he pray, but he took, for the first time, went to the United Nations, spoke in the US Congress, and really address the issue from a moral point of view.
You have compared Kiribati's future to the sinking of the Titanic. What's the connection there?
No, let me be quite clear, and I think a lot of people need to go back on this. I've been misquoted by the press. What I said in reference to the Titanic is the moral content of what was involved in the sinking of the Titanic. And it was about people on the lifeboats. Did they have the moral capability to bring on board those people, even at the risk of their own lives? And that is a challenge to the global community. Would you bring us on board your lifeboat? Or would you just let us keep floating? And that was the reference to the Titanic. A lot of people misinterpret that because they're not hearing it or they're not understanding it.
Okay, so who's the lifeboat in this case?
The lifeboat are those that continue to be able to survive the impacts, the initial impacts of climate change.
But are there any countries in particular that you hope will be the temporary lifeboats to help your people?
Well, I do expect everybody to come on board because, after all, this is a global challenge. It's not something that is localized in our part of the world. It's part of a global collective responsibility. And so everybody's involved. Everybody must be involved. And I've always argued, and I continue to argue, that anyone with the capacity to deal with the problem has the obligation to deal with it.
This world at times can be awfully generous and open its hearts to refugees, open its hearts and its doors. Mm-hmm. And other times it slams the door in the face of refugees pretty strongly. Mm-hmm. What are you finding so far?
Well, it's from my own experience, I've had very little reaction in spite of the challenges that I keep throwing around in the international fora that I've been attending. And nobody has come forward, but only recently, as you know, perhaps one of your questions that's coming is, why did you buy land in Fiji, okay? But in response to the purchase of land in Fiji, the Fiji government has come forward to say that if ever the people of Kiribati and Tuvalu should need somewhere to go as a result of the climate change impacts, Fiji would be willing to take them. And that is the kind of moral response that I've been looking for all of this time. And imagine, I know that Canada is doing a wonderful job, but imagine the capacity of countries like Canada, Australia, with so much space. But none of them have come forward and said, yes, we will take your people if you have a problem. Because that will give a sense of comfort, a sense of reassurance that we're not alone in this. And of course, we will try to do everything in our capacity to maintain this existence of our homeland. But it won't be an easy task.
It's the but I want to pick up on, because it sounds as if the inexorable conclusion to this story is that your people are going to have to leave their homeland eventually.
I think already there are people leaving, and we've had experience of communities who've had to leave their village to move in because the village they had is no longer there. So that is happening. So we are experiencing these impacts already, regarded as being minor. But I think the point that's got to be understood is this is a progressive process. It doesn't get any better.
The pictures that we just saw of your homeland are absolutely spectacular.
Wow.
What a beautiful country. What do you hope? I mean, this documentary is now going to be seen at the Hot Docs Festival, and that in addition to the campaign that you have run over the last several years to try to get the world to pay attention. What is your ultimate hope for all of this? Well,
the campaign has been about trying to galvanize international action to try and deal with the problem that we have. We talk about, at the international level, we talk about mitigation, trying to make it not so hard, the impact's not so hard. But for us, that's not an issue. It's about adaptation. And so the question that I've been looking around and continue to look around for an answer to is, will we be able to continue to live in our homes? My suggestion is this: whatever adaptation strategies we adopt, it's highly unlikely that we will be able to raise all of the islands or provide a place for all of the people. With the result that maybe some of our people, no matter how undesirable, may have to be relocated.
However it goes, we wish you well. And we thank you for coming into TVO tonight to share your views on it.
Thank you very much, but don't wish me well. You have a responsibility to do something about it as well.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
Anote Tong is the former president of the Republic of Kiribati. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.